What's up? Welcome back. In this episode, we're going to look at Django. This is a Python web framework, sort of similar to Rails. Don't worry, we're going to get back to our regularly scheduled Rails content anytime now. I've seen a ton of you kind of jumping in the comments and saying, hey, can we see some more Rails? But I am excited about Django, and so we're going to fire up a new Django app today. It's actually pretty straightforward, has a lot of analogs to Rails, and there's a lot of sort of similarly included batteries, I would say. And so we're going to start from scratch. And if you have experience with Python instead of Ruby and you want to set up a web framework and you've never done so before, I would really recommend Django. It's a really great web framework. You could also use something like Flask, which is a little bit lighter weight, but Django is really, really solid. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to fire up my virtual environment. So I'm going to say Python venv, and then we'll say source venv bin activate. This will activate our environment, and then I'm going to install Django. So this is going to install the Django package here. And now we have this new thing that we can run called Django Admin. And Django Admin has a bunch of different commands. One of them is start project. So we're going to say Django Admin start project, and we'll call this, I don't know, fun. DJ fun. So you can't have dashes in the project name. I almost always name my projects with a dash in the name, but whatever. So we're going to cd into DJ fun, and now we have our Django app sort of here. It's something that we can actually run with these things called manage commands. So now we can say Python manage. So there's this there's this file called manage.py. We can actually take a look at this, and it has like a runner that will start up the Django application. So if we say Python manage.py run server, this will fire up the Python server running on port 8000. And now we can head over and take a look at what that looks like. So similar to Rails, when you first fire it up, it has this default landing page with links to documentation and how to build this polling app. I would say if you're just starting from scratch, going through this polling app tutorial is a good idea. It will walk you through how you handle, models and views and how you start these things called apps. So this is a really solid place to start if you want to go jump over there. What I'm going to do though instead is let's work on building from scratch our Django application so that it has some authentication. Now there's a couple of auth tools that are built into Django, and we're going to take advantage of those, but we also need to kind of build out a lot ourselves in terms of the views for both login, and we also need to build out, we need the templates for login, but we also need like our own view and template for signing up or registering for the Django app. So let's jump in and say, let's make a directory called templates, and inside that template, or like in the templates directory, we're going to create another directory called registration, and that's where we'll put like our sign up view, I guess. And then a couple of files we want is something like home.html. That'll be for our root route, and then we'll also have like templates, registration, and we'll need like a login view and a sign up view. And notice that these are just HTML views. Django has its own sort of templating language, and we're going to use that to flesh out these views. But notice that it's not like html.erb or something like that. It's just, you just call the file .html, and then Django will do its own template rendering inside of the project. All right, the next step here is that you'll notice in the project, there was this sort of like project level or root level directory called DJ Fun that maps back to the same name as the project that we created. And this is where our like root settings and our root URLs are going to live. So inside of this root URLs, this is similar to routes with Rails, where we can define which URL patterns we want to match for which functions or which controller actions or which views we want to render. It's kind of like, this is where we define which paths are going to match to which thing should happen on the server. And so in here, for instance, we want to add like path with nothing inside of it, because this is where we want to render our that root sort of home.html view. So we're going to say template view.as view template, and the template name is going to be home.html. And we can name our sort of routes here. We'll name this one home. This is similar to like the named routes that you would get with Rails. They work a little bit differently, but there are similar sort of URL helpers. So from Django views.generic base, we need to import this template view class. So this template view is just a class type in Django that allows us to render just a generic view. And there's a couple different ways that you can extend template view so that you can have it hydrate and put data inside of your templates. But for now, for this root view, we don't actually need anything. All right, so now if we were to fire this up again and just say run server, we can come back over here. Template does not exist, home.html. Okay, so once we have that template in place inside of this directory, what we need to do is go into our settings.py and we need to tell it where our templates are. So we can say like base dir/templates, I think, something like this. Let's see if this works. All right, so this is our home view, I think. Our home view doesn't actually have any content. So let's go over to our template home and say like, I don't know, just drop in home. We can also, I'm gonna open a new tab here and do our run server thing. And this will auto reload most stuff just like Rails. So now we have home rendered out. Now this is just spitting back literally the string home because we don't have any HTML set up yet. So if I refresh the page and we look at the network tab, you'll notice that the response is literally the string home. So that's all that we're getting back. We don't have yet like an application HTML ERB template or like kind of layout that is wrapping around our views yet, but we're gonna do that and we're gonna do that now. So one thing that I've been doing with a lot of projects recently is adding Tailwind. So inside of our Django application here, let's do kind of do this step by step. So we'll say setup with empty views. Okay, let's add Tailwind to our Django application. So we're going to say back over here where we have our environment set up, we're going to say pip install Django Tailwind. Django Tailwind is a package that has a bunch of stuff that's pretty convenient. Now, I have learned that the order that you execute these things matters quite a bit. So we're going to jump into our settings file right after we install that Django Tailwind package from pip. And then we're going to add Tailwind to our installed apps. Now, the next thing we want to do is say Python manage Tailwind init. And this will initialize a specific app that is going to act as our theme. And then we're going to sort of like rely on that theme's CSS and settings in order to build out our base templates and our sort of like styles for the rest of the project. Okay, so we've now initialized Tailwind. The next step is we want to open up our settings again and add in that theme app. So like, okay, so when that ran, it created this new directory called theme. Now this theme is actually a type of app. Now, the way that Django works is you kind of build out these different features of your application as apps. They're sort of composable and you can install some or not install some and use them by different projects. In my experience, in the same way in Rails, you might build a monolith where like all of your controllers and models and everything are in one giant project. In Django, I've also used it the same way where you just build out a bunch of different apps and then you install all of them. I haven't used Django where you have only like some apps installed. So what we're going to do is every time we create a new app over here, we're going to drop it into our installed apps here. And that's kind of like how we will tell the root application that, or the root project, DJ Fun, that we want to use this application theme. So this is the new one that was just created when we ran Tailwind init. And inside of here, it has a base template that has some like default Tailwind stuff. So this base.html in Django language, base.html is sort of like the layout. So if you're familiar with Rails, they have this application HTML ERB thing that wraps all of the content. Inside of Django, we'll have this base.html. All right, we've got our theme installed. There's another thing that's really handy, and it's called browser reload. Django browser reload, and this does exactly what you expect. And the way that this works is we need to add a middleware so that it knows like how to trigger this. Django browser reload dot middleware dot browser reload middleware. Okay, and we need like to set a couple more variables here. So we're going to say Tailwind app name is theme, and I just use the defaults that it comes with. We also need to set internal IPs. I actually don't know how this is used or why this is used. 127.0.0.1. This is just like our local host. I have a feeling this has to do with in development when you're running Tailwind, we're going to actually set up a separate process that starts watching a bunch of files, and as they're changing, it's going to recalculate the classes, the CSS classes that it needs to include in like the distribution file or something. And I assume this internal IPs thing is about that, but I don't actually know. It's just like part of the install instructions for Django Tailwind. Okay, so that should get us pretty close. In order to get this browser middleware thing to work, it needs some routes because it'll kind of like pull on the front end and then hit some routes on the back end. So we need to go back into our URLs and add a new path here that's going to be sort of like a private path, reload, and this is going to be something like, we're going to include some URLs from a package, Django browser reload.urls. So the way that a lot of packages or a lot of these apps work in Django is that you will define some top level path that points at a set of URLs, and then those URLs for that app will be defined in that app's inside of that app's own sort of URLs.py file. So inside of once we go and create a new app for our project, we will have to come back here and specify which URLs, or like kind of like what is the root for the URLs, the set of URLs for our app, and then we will we'll point at it. So in this case, this is us sort of pointing this reload path. So if we go to like localhost /_ reload __, that will contain the set of routes that are related to the Django browser reload URLs. So if we were to come over here and say something like reload like this, let's make sure it's still running. We need to add include. So we just use this new method here. This is from Django.urls, the Django.urls package. So let's rerun the server. And if we were to reload this page, you'll see that this reload / thing has a route that is called events. So something inside of that Django browser reload package is using this route in order to like tell it that it needs to reload. Whatever. If you go to like any route and just say like blah, it'll tell you like, oh, that's not a valid route in development, at least. It'll tell you, and then it'll show you like, here's the different routes that you can actually hit. So one is just this name home. We know that's the root route. Notice there's also this one called admin, and you can actually just jump directly into an admin interface where it'll show you all of your models and you can interact with them. It's almost like Rails admin, but comes out of the box. It's pretty handy. All right, let's keep going. So now that we have these sort of set up, we want to run Python. Oops, let's run it over here. Python manage Tailwind install. I know we did init and also install. The install step is actually doing like sort of like an npm install for all of the npm modules that are required for Tailwind to run. And then we're going to say something like Python manage Tailwind start. This starts up the process that's going to sort of watch for changes on our files. And if you notice inside of our theme here, there's this static source, and this is where our Tailwind config is. So this is where we kind of like define all the different routes that we need to watch in order to see if there's any changes to those. Okay, let's keep going. So back inside of our templates directory, what I actually want to do is I'm going to move this base.html into my templates, my templates root. So I'm going to say move from theme templates base into my templates directory. I want to just like move it up a directory so that I can have my base HTML or like the layout inside of that root templates directory. It's just a little bit easier for me to reason about if I do it that way. And then we're going to open up that base.html and we're going to edit this page. Also, if we come back over here and no, we don't have it running anymore. Run server, let's see. Okay. All right. So right now, nothing is, or like the base is not being used by home. So what we need to do is we want to say this is like the template style for Django, as we use the curly brace %, and then we're going to say extends base.html, and this should extend now the base. That's kind of how we say which layout a specific view should use. So inside of the home route, we're saying that it extends base.html. Now you'll notice that we don't see the word home anymore on this page. And if we look at the network tab at the response that's coming back, this is only showing us the content from base.html. It's not showing us anything about home. And that's because inside of our top level template, we don't have any way to say that we need to sort of like yield the contents of any like sub view that is rendering. So in Rails, we'd say like yield, right, for our application HTML. But here instead, what we're going to do is say block content, and then we're going to say end block. This is how we do the same thing. And then back inside of home, we need to wrap our home now in a block content and end block. That's how we get, or that's how we should get home to yield. So now home is printing out there. I don't like the serif font, so I'm going to go back over here. We're going to rip some of this out. So we'll just say like Django demo, and then this is how our Tailwind tags are loaded into the page, and then the package comes with some default stuff that I usually just rip out. So I'm going to pull all of these out, and whatever. We should now have, cool. Now we have our Tailwind home thing showing up, which works. In fact, I don't actually want this to be the H1. Like the content should not be the H1. It should just be like, I don't know, maybe inside of like a main or something. Maybe not even inside a main. Let's just put it inside these divs, which we can then use as like our container. So now we see home up here. That's working great. And we're sort of off to the races. Something that, okay, so the next thing that we want to do is actually set up authentication. So the first thing we want to do is actually like, in order to set up authentication, is recognize that auth sort of comes out of the box. So what we could do is run this manage command. So Python manage create super user, and there's no such table auth user. So if we want to use authentication, which comes out of the box, first we need to migrate the database. And the way that we migrate the database in Django is we say Python manage make migrations, and then we'll say migrate, and this will run all of our migrations. So in Rails, we just say like Rails DB migrate, and that will run all of our migrations that we've created. In Django, every time we make a change to a model, the way that we sort of like update the database is we change the model class itself, and then we run make migrations, which will detect to see if there's any changes that need to happen on the database. Then that will make any sets of migrations that we need, and then we can run migrate. And migrate is executing all of those SQL commands against the database. So this is going to create a whole bunch of different tables, including a user table here somewhere. So in one of these migrations somewhere, it created a user table. So now we should be able to say Python manage create super user. Do we want to use my name? Sure. And then the email address, wave@cjav.dev. And the password, we'll just do password. And okay, super user created successfully. So that's kind of how you create this root admin user. Now, back inside of our application, if we go to admin, we can actually log in, wave@cjav.dev. And Oh, the username is not the email address. It's just the username. Okay, so this is Django Admin. It's sort of similar to Rails Admin. It gives you a list of all of your different models, and you can just like click on a model and you can update information about that. So like you can just click into username. If we wanted to, we could say like, okay, this is first name, last name, etc., etc. You can add them and remove them from different groups. You can give different permissions. So it comes with quite a bit, just like straight out of the box. Pretty handy. Now, you might be wondering like, okay, so how do I make like a login page? Well, there is like an accounts route that we can mount directly into our views that will use sort of the default auth URLs. So if we go back to our project root here, and we can add a path, a new route for accounts / that will include django.contrib.auth URLs. Now if we refresh this page, now we have a bunch of different routes. Look at that. So we have a login route, a logout route, password change, reset, all of these different routes. So if we go to like accounts / login, you'll notice that we have just a blank page. That's because it's loading that login.html page. So the one that we created in the very beginning, if we come into registration and say, this is the login page and refresh, you'll notice that shows up there. So what you're noticing is that from Django contrib auth URLs, or from the Django contrib auth package, it gives you routes and it gives you some views, but it doesn't give you the templates for those views. So in order to build out the templates, we need to like write our own implementation of what the view should be. So if we were to build our own login view, we could come over here and say, all right, what we want to do is we want a form, and the method is going to be post. And we want this form to submit something. And it's going to like pass the username and password back to the view, so we can log the user in. And we can, in the case of login, we can use the built-in Django auth stuff to log in. All right, the other thing we need in Django is we need to include our Csrf token. The same way that we included the hidden field in Rails, which is the form authenticity token, we might need to do something, or we would need to do something like this in Django. That'll drop in our Csrf token or the authenticity token into the form. And then there is a form that is being used to hydrate this view or this template from the login view. So again, in Django, the terminology is a little bit different. There's not like controller and then view. It's not the same sort of language. Instead, we use view to mean like the Python class or the Python function that is going to like use your ORM to collect data from the database and then figure out which template to render and then actually render the template. So that's what we would call a view in Django instead of calling it a controller. But in Rails, we would say like, oh, our controller is where we're going to like use our active record models to pull things out of the database and then pick which view to render. So in this case, that Django contrib auth, the stuff that's underlying that is going to include tools for rendering a login page. And one of those tools is a form. So we can just say form.asp, and that should render out a form. So now we see this username and password, but notice that it's like not in the style of Tailwind. So what we want to do is, again, extends base.html, and we want to say that this is in our block content. And if we wanted to, we could write a custom authentication base that would just be used for our login pages. So now you can see it's sort of Tailwindy, and we would need to sort of style this as whatever, our button classes, which we might get from something like Tailwind UI or whatever. So what I want to do though is just show that we can actually log in here. So we can say CJ Villa, and now we're sort of logged in, but we're redirected to this /account/profile. That is like the default, but I don't want to actually go build out a profile view or anything. So instead what I'm going to do is go into settings, and I'm going to set a couple of different environment variables, or app-wide variables. One is login redirect URL, and we're going to set that to the root, and we're also going to set the same for logout. Logout redirect URL is going to be the root. So now if I go back to accounts login and log in, then I'm redirected back to home. In order to add a registration flow is build out an app that we can then use to create a view for a sign up and also a template for the sign up. So we're going to say Python manage py, and there's another subcommand here called start app. This is going to create a brand new app. I guess we have to give it a name, accounts. Now I'm going to use the same exact name as we use for the path for the Django contrib auth URLs. And the reason is that we want the URLs to sort of flow and match nicely. Okay, so now that we have this new app, accounts, notice that inside of accounts, we have a bunch of things that it gives us by default. So we just created a new accounts app that has a migrations directory that'll contain all the different migrations that we might have. Has this admin thing if we want to customize and register our different models for admin views. Now down inside of our views, we want to define a new view. So we're going to create a new view here called sign up view. And this is going to be a class that is going to inherit from a create view. So inside of Django, there's a bunch of different basic view types. There's some for all of the CRUD actions that you would expect: create, show the detail, list. So in this case, what we want to do is we're going to create a create view. So this is going to be a generic create view. Now this generic package is inside of one of the Django tools. From Django.views, we're going to import generic. Now inside of our signup view, we need to tell it what the template is that we want to render when we load up this view. So the template name is going to be registration signup.html. This is going to map to the same signup HTML that we created here. Let's actually just say like signup view. Okay, so that is going to be our signup view. We're going to come back and add a couple more things here, but even though we have this view, we don't have a way to actually like render the view because we don't have a path or we don't have a route in order to render this view. So we need to create a URL. So we're going to add urls.py here. And inside of urls.py, we're going to ultimately expose this URL patterns, which is going to contain a list of URL patterns that are, again, composed of these path things. So in this case, sign up is going to create one of those sign up views. We're going to call as view, and the name for this view is going to be sign up. And the app name is another thing we can expose from this URLs. This app name is helpful when we're trying to use some of the URL helpers inside of the view templates. So we can say something like accounts : sign up, and this will know how to resolve like /accounts /sign up based on sort of the namespacing. So if we did not add an app name here, then we would resolve through just like the normal name of sign up, but then you risk having conflicts with your other app names. Okay, so we need to import some stuff. So from Django.urls, import path. And we also need to say something like from .import star or import views. And we can say like views.signup there. All right, the next thing we need to do is, so we just created this new accounts app. In order to use that accounts app, remember that like every time we create a new app, we have to go into settings and install that app. Now I'm going to do this with accounts.apps.accounts.config. This is referencing this class here, which is going to allow us to, install it in a special way. This was kind of like the recommended approach inside the Django docs, and so that's kind of the pattern that I've been following. All right, so now that we have that installed, we also want to go back down to our root URLs pattern and add another path here. So what was really sort of surprising or interesting is that in this root URLs thing, we can have two paths or like two patterns that are registered with the same prefix of accounts /. And as long as the names of the routes inside of those don't conflict, I think we're going to be fine. So we're going to say accounts.urls. So this accounts.urls is pointing at our accounts urls.py, and this Django contrib auth URLs is pointing at the Django contrib auth packages URLs that come sort of like out of the box when you install Django. Okay, so now that we have the URLs installed, I don't know, can we see the signup view? Let's see, accounts signup. Okay, so we're missing a query set. So when we have a create view, we need to define what the class is that is going to, either we need to define the form class, or we need to define like some query set that's going to be used for that form, I think. So here we want to say user creation form. This is part of Django contrib, so we want to import that from Django contrib.auth.forms, import user creation form. Another thing that we're going to need down here is some success URL. And this is where we're going to redirect after we successfully fill out the form. So we're going to say reverse lazy login. And so this is going to be from Django.urls, import reverse lazy. This is going to be like, when we're talking about reversing and then passing in a string, that is similar to using like a URL for or a path for inside of Rails. So we might have, inside of Rails, we would have used something like login path or something like that. So this is just the way that we can like look up what is the route for, /account/login. So now we have our sign up view. So that's cool. So that's actually rendering. Now back inside of our sign up template, again, we want to do something very similar to this. So let's just copy the whole thing, paste it in. Instead of login, we're going to do sign up. And I can't remember if there's anything else that we need to do. Yeah, so that should be fine. So if we refresh, okay, so now this is like the default sign up form that we get, or the user creation form that we get straight out of Django. So it comes with this username thing. So maybe we'll put in like test, password, and password. Now if we hit submit, this password is too common because I literally typed the password. So it needs to have some other stuff. So password exclamation one, password exclamation one. Click sign up. Now we're signed up. Test. And we're logged in. Now we're logged in, I think. How do we know? Well, we should probably like put something on this page that tells us that we're actually logged in instead of just seeing home there. So one thing that we can do is we can update that base HTML. So let's go back to our base and add something here. Maybe we'll just add like a nav. And inside of the nav, we can include stuff about whether or not the user is authenticated. So here inside of the view, we'll have access to some user objects. We can say something like if user.authenticated or is authenticated, then what we want to do is print out their user.username or something. Let's see if that works. Okay, so now we see the user's username. So maybe we can just say like, hello, or welcome back, so-and-so. All right, now we can see that welcome back and their username. We can also say something like else, if they're not logged in, maybe we want to put an A tag here that's going to the login route. Now we could just say something like accounts login, like this, login. And you've seen me do this inside of Rails. It's a little bit lazy, right? And again, we can do probably the same thing, but log out. if they are logged in. So if we click on log out, we're logged out. Now we see this login link. We click on login, test, put in our username and password. We're logged back in. Now we have a logout and a login link. But instead of using like hard coding this string, what we want to do is we want to use a URL helper. And in Django, the way this works is we say URL, and then we say the login, logout. This is logout. And that should give us the same URL, but it's like using that reverse tooling to figure out what the actual URL should be. URL, login. All right, let's see here. So now if we inspect this, we should see the same accounts/logout, and we do. So now we can click on that. And login, again, should also have accounts/login, and it does. Okay. All right, so we are logged back in. Welcome back, login test. So now we have a Django application. We're able to register, we can log in, we can log out. We don't have any forgot password or anything fancy like that, but it does have Tailwind installed, so we can do some nice CSS. The other thing I guess we want to do here is register. And so here our URL is actually going to be accounts sign up. And so now if we're logged out, we can register as a new user, test2, okay, and test2. All right, so now we're logged in as test2. Notice though, if I try to go to /admin, I'm not able to get to admin because test2 is not a super user. So we created that super user in the beginning with this username, and now I'm able to log in. I can go see the users. We have two users, test and test2. Notice that they don't have staff status. One thing we could do is just like go into the test user. Notice that the password too is like securely stored. It's nice and whatever, nice and safe. We can make this user a staff user. We could also make them a super user, save this, and now we can log out. And if we log back in as test, I think I made test a super user, right? /admin. Now I can see admin as the test user. So welcome test, and they can come in here and sort of make the same changes if they wanted to. All right, so that gives you sort of an idea of how you might get started with a Django application. In another episode, we could go through how you would set up a CRUD application, going through all of the, the default actions for creating a database model, migrating it. Let me know in the comments if you're interested in seeing more Django content. Otherwise, we'll get back to our to sticking with Rails stuff. I know a lot of people have been asking for more clear B&B content. I have some ideas, but I haven't really like jumped into recording anything yet. So we've got tons of stuff that we could cover. Let me know what you're interested in learning in the comments. And thanks again so much for watching, for your time and attention. Really appreciate it. And we'll see you in the next one.